Hey guys, it's Cosmic Skeptic, and it seems that we have once again successfully completed another orbit around the Sun. And I thought that for the first video of 2017, I wanted to try something a little bit different. You guys know that I love talking about philosophical concepts in general and doing response videos, but I thought that it would be interesting to introduce what could be described as a kind of series, where I look at some specific arguments and objections that theists often have, and try to debunk them. And so for today's video, I wanted to look at a specific objection to the popular principle of the problem of evil. Now, you might have heard me say before that I don't personally think that the problem of evil is a particularly good argument against God. I think there are much more compelling rebuttals on offer. But it is very popular, and I think it's at least partly attributable to at least starting many people on a journey towards atheism, so I think it's certainly worth defending at least to some degree. Now, this idea of the problem of evil dates back at least as far as the ancient Greeks. In fact, one of the earliest known forms that this argument takes comes from the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, who once famously stated as follows: "Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God?" This is effectively an attack on any god which claims to be all of three things, that is, omnipotent, all-powerful, omniscient, all-knowing, and omnibenevolent, all-loving. And philosophers such as Epicurus and J.L. Mackie have concluded that these three attributes are logically incompatible with evil existing in the world, hence the problem of evil. Now, the specific objection to this supposed problem that I want to take a look at is the argument that evil exists in the world because God gave humans free will. And this is a popular response. People will tell you that, yes, God wants people to get into heaven and he wants them to be good, but he values free will even more, and so he permits evil as a natural result of allowing humans to have free will.
The atheist assumes that if God is all-powerful, he can create just any world that he wants. And that's not necessarily true. If God wills to create free creatures, then he can't guarantee they'll always do what is right. It's logically impossible to make someone freely do something. So God's being all-powerful doesn't mean he can do the logically impossible.
But if you employ this line of thinking, then you run into two immediate problems, the first of which being this. Evil is generally categorized into two forms. We have moral evil and natural evil. Now, moral evil is dependent on free will. People have to make a choice to do things like murder, stealing, or rape. But on the other hand, you have natural evil, things like earthquakes, famines, and floods. And these things can't be attributable to free will, so you'd have to still explain where this evil comes from. But of course, and as I'm sure you've heard before, theists will sometimes still blame these natural disasters on the free will of man. If there's a flood, for instance, you can generally go on YouTube and find some kind of animated pastor blaming the flood on the sins of homosexuality or some other kind of arbitrary biblical law that's supposedly been broken. But even if you use this defense, you still run into the second problem. And the second, and in my opinion more compelling problem that I can come up with, is this. Consider the following question: can consciously imposed evil and suffering exist in heaven? Now, this might seem like a yes or no question, in other words, a dilemma, but I would argue that it's actually a trilemma. I think that there are three possible answers to this question. And the first is yes, consciously imposed evil and suffering can exist in heaven. But of course this makes no sense, because if one conscious being can impose evil and suffering upon another, then it wouldn't really be heaven at all. So we can immediately rule this one out. Option two is no, because God removes this part of free will from human ability. In other words, he disallows people from committing evil acts. But if this is true, then that means that as soon as you get to heaven, your free will is immediately restricted. You are no longer a free-thinking individual. And again, would you really consider it to be heaven if you're some kind of robot programmed to only be able to do good deeds with no freedom? Think of it this way. Under these circumstances, your free will does not exist in heaven. You can't commit consciously evil acts. But contrast this with hell, where you'd have no reason to, but there's nothing stopping you from being nice. You could say thank you as Satan throws you into a blazing fire. And this naturally lends itself to the conclusion that the only place that has true free will, the only place in the afterlife that is truly free, is hell. And of course, this also isn't a very satisfactory answer. And that leaves us with our only remaining possible answer, which is no, this type of evil can't exist in heaven, but free will is somehow still retained, perhaps through some kind of theological magic. Of course, the problem with this line of thought is that it completely defeats the original objection. If you're arguing that there can exist a place, i.e. heaven, where there is both free will and no evil, then the argument that evil only exists as a result of free will doesn't make any sense. So I'm afraid that whichever answer you come up with to this trilemma, it doesn't lead to a satisfactory conclusion. Now, of course, despite all of this, I'm not saying by any stretch that the problem of evil is a perfect objection to the existence of God. There are plenty of rebuttals that you could come up with as a theist. Like I mentioned earlier, you could simply say that evil exists as God's form of revenge, like Noah's Ark or Sodom and Gomorrah. Of course, then you do run into a whole bunch of problems. For instance, how is it that unborn children are dying when there are people who blatantly contradict religious teachings who don't seem to suffer in any way at all? But I don't want to get off track. That's an entirely different objection and therefore is a topic for another day. The purpose of this video was to say that the specific objection that evil only exists as a result of free will should be avoided at all costs. But anyway, like I said nearer the beginning of the video, I'm thinking of doing this kind of thing a bit more often, looking at more specific arguments in favor of God and trying to debunk them. So if it's something that you want to see, do be sure to let me know. I hope you all had a fabulous New Year's. I know I certainly did, as anybody who has me on Snapchat would know, which, by the way, you can add me on Snapchat, username Cosmic Skeptic. If you want to follow me on social media, you can do here. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.